What do you think happens when a woman refuses to kneel before the colonial masters? This is the true, untold story of Queen Nzinga Mbande, the warrior queen of Angola who fought the Portuguese for over 40 years, outliving most of the commanders sent to eliminate her. From royal court diplomacy to jungle guerrilla warfare, Nzinga defied colonization with unmatched courage, strategy, and fire. In this video, we explore her rise to power, her legendary resistance, her tactical alliances, and the legacy she left behind as one of Africa's greatest rulers. If you've never heard of Nzinga, it's time to meet the Lioness of Matamba and Ndongo, the queen who made history bow to her name. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more legendary African history told the way it should be, with truth, pride, and power. The kingdom of Ndongo in central Angola stood as one of the most powerful African kingdoms in the 16th century. It was home to the Mbundu people, a proud Bantu-speaking nation with complex political systems and a strong warrior class. The throne was held by the Gola, a title that gave the region its modern name, Angola. In the late 1500s, Ngola Kilwanji Kiasamba sat on that throne. He ruled during a time of growing danger. Portuguese colonizers, having already taken hold of nearby Luanda, were expanding their grip, using Christian missionaries and brutal slave traders to destabilize African kingdoms and steal their people. Nzinga Mbande, one of his daughters, was born into this storm, likely around 1583. Her mother, Nkombe, was one of the king's lesser wives, which technically made Nzinga a royal, but not a direct heir to the throne. However, Nzinga was special from the start. Her name meant to twist or turn, a name said to come from the fact that her umbilical cord was wrapped around her neck at birth, an omen in many Angolan traditions that foretold greatness or power. Nzinga grew up in a palace filled with court politics, sibling rivalry, and the looming fear of foreign invasion. She wasn't the only child. Her father had multiple sons, including Ndongo Mbande, her half-brother and presumed successor. But Nzinga stood out. She was sharp, observant, and fiercely intelligent. Unlike many women of her time, she received royal education, learning diplomacy, warfare, and even foreign languages, including Portuguese, which would later become one of her deadliest weapons. Her father recognized her intellect. Historical accounts suggest he often brought her to meetings with Portuguese envoys, allowing her to observe and absorb. This wasn't common, but Nzinga wasn't common. She learned how to negotiate, how to speak without revealing too much, and how to read between a colonizer's smile. But peace didn't last. When her father died in the early 1610s, power passed to her brother, Ndongo Mbande. His rule came at a terrible time. The Portuguese were tightening their grip, forming alliances with rival African states and kidnapping thousands of Mbundu people for the transatlantic slave trade. Angola and Mbande panicked. He made decisions that destabilized Ndongo, including ordering the killing of many nobles who he feared might challenge his authority, including Nzinga's own son. Whether to eliminate competition or out of sheer paranoia, his actions brought civil unrest and weakened the kingdom. Desperate in 1622, he called on the one person he could trust to face the Portuguese on diplomatic ground, his half-sister Nzinga. And she didn't come meekly. Nzinga arrived in Luanda, the colonial capital, dressed not as a subject, but as a diplomat. Fluent in Portuguese, draped in royal robes and carrying herself with fierce pride, she was ready to negotiate directly with Governor João Correia de Sousa. In that infamous meeting, when no chair was offered to her, Nzinga commanded one of her attendants to kneel and used his back as her throne. That was more than drama. It was a declaration. I will not kneel to you. I am not beneath you. She brokered a temporary peace treaty and agreed to baptism, taking the name Ana de Sousa Nzinga Mbande as part of a calculated political move. The Portuguese believed they had tamed her. They didn't know Nzinga had only begun her long game. But just months later, her brother died. Some say poisoned, others say he took his own life, broken by failure. With no sons left, a fractured kingdom, and enemies pressing from all sides, Nzinga Mbande declared herself Queen of Ndongo. The Portuguese scoffed. They didn't know the war they had just awakened. The year was 1624. Nzinga Mbande had just declared herself Queen of Ndongo, a bold, unprecedented move in a patriarchal society. While some supported her, others, including rival nobles, saw her as an illegitimate ruler, a woman overstepping boundaries. But Nzinga knew time was running out. She didn't have the luxury of earning slow loyalty. She had to rule with fire. The Portuguese, who had once smiled at her in the Luanda court, wasted no time betraying her. They broke the peace treaty she negotiated, launching aggressive raids across Ndongo's territory. They allied with Imbangala mercenaries, a fierce warrior group known for ritual cannibalism and scorched earth tactics. These mercenaries were devastating, burning villages, kidnapping civilians, and selling thousands of Mbundu people into slavery. Nzinga was surrounded. Her capital was under siege. Her army was smaller. Her resources stretched thin. The Portuguese pushed deep into Ndongo territory, hoping to crush the new queen before she could solidify power. But Nzinga was no ordinary ruler. Instead of waiting for the inevitable, she made a tactical retreat, slipping away with her closest supporters and a handful of warriors. They fled east, through rivers, forests, and enemy land, into the kingdom of Matamba, a neighboring state ruled by another Mbundu people. Matamba had been loosely connected to the politics of Ndongo, but Nzinga had something else in mind. She didn't want sanctuary. She wanted conquest. Using sharp diplomacy and limited force, Nzinga overthrew Matamba's queen and declared herself ruler of that kingdom too. Now she had a new capital, a fresh military base, and access to internal trade routes, including contacts with other African allies and even Dutch merchants who were beginning to challenge Portuguese supremacy along the coast. From her jungle stronghold, Nzinga reorganized. She recruited warriors from the discontented Mbundu clans, former slaves, and even some defectors from rival states. She reshaped Matamba into a guerrilla war machine, not just surviving, but striking back. She understood that this was more than a territorial war. It was a battle for identity, sovereignty, and survival. Meanwhile, the Portuguese continued pushing their colonization agenda, backed by Lisbon and powered by the Atlantic slave trade. Luanda became a major slave port, funneling tens of thousands of kidnapped Africans to Brazil and the Caribbean. But even as they expanded, one name echoed like a whisper of defiance in the hills and forests: Nzinga. In 1641, the Dutch, Portugal's European rivals, attacked and captured Luanda. The balance of power shifted. Nzinga, ever the strategist, saw opportunity. She reached out to the Dutch and formed an alliance. With their weapons and support, she launched counterattacks against Portuguese forts and began reclaiming lost territory. Her forces ambushed supply lines, raided outposts, and freed captives. And yet, even as she fought, Nzinga didn't abandon diplomacy. She sent letters to European monarchs. She negotiated with rival African kings. She even converted fully to Christianity, at least publicly, knowing it would buy her time and allies. But she never forgot what the Portuguese did. Every move was calculated, every step survival. Back in Portugal, officials debated how this African queen had managed to evade them for so long. How could a woman, exiled, outnumbered, outgunned, become a lasting threat? They didn't understand that Nzinga wasn't just fighting for power. She was fighting for a nation, her people, and she would stop at nothing, even if it meant war for the next 40 years. By the mid-1640s, Queen Nzinga had transformed herself from a royal exile into one of the most powerful forces in Central Africa. Ruling from her new capital in Matamba, she didn't just resist Portuguese rule, she actively disrupted it. Her army was unlike any seen before in the region. It was multinational, multi-ethnic, and deeply loyal. Former slaves, Mbundu warriors, Imbangala fighters, whom she had once opposed but later absorbed, defectors, women trained in combat, all made up Nzinga's new war machine. In the thick jungles of Matamba, she trained them in guerrilla warfare, fast, brutal raids on Portuguese forts and slave caravans. They moved like shadows, hitting supply lines, rescuing prisoners, and burning everything they couldn't carry. Nzinga also made sure her kingdom was self-sustaining. She regulated internal trade, taxed merchants, and even took control of smaller surrounding territories. Her warriors enforced discipline. Her spies infiltrated Portuguese ranks. Her diplomats maintained fragile ties with both African allies and European enemies. And through it all, she led from the front. Nzinga wasn't a queen sitting on a golden throne barking orders. She wore armor. She rode with her cavalry. She marched into battle. Even in her 50s and 60s, Portuguese and Dutch accounts describe her as fierce, commanding, and relentless. Yet her position was still fragile. As much as she hated the transatlantic slave trade, Nzinga, like many rulers of her time, also engaged in it strategically. She couldn't defeat the Portuguese with morality alone. She traded captives taken from her enemies in exchange for firearms and resources. It was a brutal compromise in a brutal time, but one she made for survival and power. Meanwhile, her alliance with the Dutch reached its peak when both forces cooperated to pressure the Portuguese in Luanda. For a while, it seemed Nzinga might actually drive them out completely. But in 1648, everything shifted again. The Portuguese, now regrouped under a powerful new governor, received reinforcements from Brazil and launched a surprise counterattack, retaking Luanda and forcing the Dutch to retreat. Nzinga lost her key European ally. The noose tightened again, but Nzinga didn't flinch. Instead of surrendering, she turned inward. She reorganized her forces, focused on defending Matamba, and continued harassing Portuguese troops along trade routes. She expanded her network of alliances with neighboring kingdoms like Kasanje, creating a unified buffer zone against colonial invasion. What kept her strong? Partly her spiritual authority. Nzinga wasn't just a political leader, she was seen by her people as having a near mystical presence. She led rituals, invoked ancestral spirits, and carefully blended Christian diplomacy with traditional Mbundu beliefs. She played both worlds like a master chessboard. Portuguese governors came and went, treaties were signed and broken. But Queen Nzinga, she endured. For over 4 decades, she resisted Portuguese domination, outlived nearly every general sent to defeat her, and ruled longer than most European monarchs of her time. By the time she reached her late 70s, even the Portuguese began to realize Nzinga couldn't be defeated by war alone. She was too clever, too ruthless when needed, and too loved by her people. And so in her final decade, Nzinga did something few expected. She turned once more to diplomacy, but this time on her own terms. By the 1650s, Queen Nzinga was no longer just a warrior. She had become a living symbol of African defiance. She ruled from the kingdom of Matamba, which she had molded into a powerful state both feared and respected across Central Africa. Her court was structured, her military disciplined, and her economy thriving through controlled trade. But as the years pressed on, Nzinga faced new realities. She was aging, her enemies were adapting, and more importantly, the world around her was changing. The Portuguese, though still brutal, had shifted strategies. They now pursued diplomacy more than warfare, hoping that time, patience, and politics could succeed where guns had failed. Nzinga didn't meet this new phase with denial. She met it with strategy. In the late 1650s, Nzinga began engaging with the Portuguese in serious diplomatic talks. She wasn't weak, she was calculating. The years of war had taken a toll on her people, and Nzinga knew that to preserve what remained of her sovereignty, she needed to make peace. But this time on her own terms. In 1656, she negotiated a formal peace treaty with Portugal. The agreement recognized her as the legitimate ruler of Matamba and Ndongo, a stunning reversal of decades of colonial dismissal. More so, Nzinga promised to end resistance, allow Christian missionaries in her territory, and support some trade networks, including, controversially, aspects of the slave trade, though she worked to limit her own people's involvement. To outsiders, it looked like submission. To her people, it was survival. Inside Matamba, Nzinga focused on securing the future. She converted fully to Christianity, but still retained spiritual authority rooted in Mbundu tradition. She restructured her court, trained female advisors and military commanders, and took steps to establish a succession plan, something she never had during her youth, which had led to the civil chaos that followed her brother's death. Yet she faced challenges from within. Some of her generals believed she had grown soft. Others feared that without war, Matamba's power would crumble. And then there was the haunting reality. Nzinga had no biological children. To solve this, she appointed her sister Barbara as her successor, a move that defied patriarchal expectations once again. On December 17, 1663, at the age of about 80, Queen Nzinga Mbande died in her capital, possibly due to illness. There were no drums of war that day. But across Angola there was silence, the silence that comes when a storm ends. Her death left a vacuum. Portuguese forces would slowly regain dominance in the region. Matamba remained semi-autonomous for a while, but it would never again know a leader like Nzinga. And yet, Nzinga never truly disappeared. She was born in chains, but she ruled as a queen. They called her savage, but she built a kingdom. They tried to erase her, but her name echoes through time. Nzinga Mbande, the woman who outwitted Europe's strongest empire, the lioness who led from the front, the queen who refused to bow and forced the world to kneel. And now you know her story. If you felt the power of Queen Nzinga's legacy, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and share this story with someone who needs to remember who we are. Subscribe for more legendary African history, told the way it should be. This was Tales of the Ancestors.